The Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. Realities for a New Reality. 2 days, 25 workshops, renowned speakers and presenters, by families, for families, nearly 40 hours of unfiltered and straightforward information, made possible by the leaders in disability rights advocacy for over 45 years, Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher, attorneys at law. So welcome to this session of our ongoing encore presentation series of the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending the Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Virtual Parent Empowerment Conference. My name is Christina Ssdi, and I will be your moderator for the workshop entitled Accessing Appropriate Adult Services. Our presenter for this session is Maria Fisher, a partner here at Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher. Before we begin the session, we ask all participants to remain muted throughout the session. This workshop will last approximately 90 minutes. If time allows, the presenter will take questions either intermittently or at the end. Please ask your questions through the chat feature in the control bar, and I will ask as many of them as I can, again, time permitting. If you've not already done so, I highly encourage you to sign up for this evening's keynote address delivered by former New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Helen E. Hones, entitled Autism After COVID-19, Navigating a World Where Everything Has Changed and Nothing Has Changed. Justice Hones is also the parent of an adult child with autism and will provide a unique perspective on the times in which we live. She is both an inspiring person and inspirational speaker. You don't want to miss out. And now I'm going to introduce Maria. Maria is personally committed to the field of disability law. The mother of an adult daughter with autism, Maria's legal work focuses on guardianship, estate planning, and helping families of adults with disabilities access and retain appropriate services. She completed an internship at the New Jersey Department of the Public Advocate, where she conducted legal research and drafted papers on civil rights, healthcare, education, and administrative law. She's testified before the New Jersey legislature on housing issues related to individuals with people with developmental disabilities and on controversial policies of the Division of Developmental Disabilities. She has assisted in the development of several pieces of legislation to expand and protect the rights of individuals with disabilities. She's the president of the board of directors of the ARC Mercer and is the immediate past chairperson of the Special Olympics New Jersey. Additionally, she is a member of the Family Advisory Committee at the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey. She earned her JD from Seton Hall University of Law and is a member of Pennsylvania and New Jersey bars. Maria enjoys spending time with her children, Kelly, Tracy, and Matthew, as well as her extended family and friends. She likes dancing, going to concerts, and traveling. She currently lives in Mercer County with her 2 youngest children. Now, take it away, Maria.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual conference, and in particular to learn about accessing adult services. I hope everybody is well today. So Christina, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm just going to add a little snippet to that only because it becomes material when I'm talking. So my adult child, her name is Tracy, and when I start to talk about eligibility criteria and other experiences that we all have when we're applying for services, I often talk about her, so I like to get her name out there in the beginning so that you all know who I am talking about. So today we're going to touch on how we access adult services. And we begin by talking about first DDD eligibility and how we apply for that. Then the New Jersey Comprehensive Assessment Tool, which is a tool that the division uses to determine eligibility and the budget for the individual's future services. And then we do talk a little bit about Medicaid eligibility, but I'm only going to touch on that briefly because we have another entire workshop that will be tomorrow that will go into all of those benefit pieces, but it is important to touch on that a little bit because of the fact that you can't actually get the services from DDD if you don't have your Medicaid eligibility in place. I will also talk about the DDD waivers and then touch on the types of services and supports that the division does offer. I'm very happy to take questions during, although put them into the chat feature, and I'll stop at certain points so that Christina can ask the questions about that part of the topic. I find that if people are trying to hold their questions to the end, sometimes it's just not as effective. So we will begin. So first and foremost, an individual with intellectual and developmental disability, when they are aging out of school, needs to be connected with the Division of Developmental Disabilities in order to have continued services. Because once the individual turns 21 and ages out of their educational entitlement, services come from DDD. So first step is to apply. So how do we do that? Well, when a child turns 18, we are able to apply for those services. If your child has been connected with the Department of Children and Families, Children's System of Care, most of us know it really as Perform Care, there's a short form application for you to complete for DDD eligibility. If your child, for whatever reason, has not been connected with Perform Care, then there's a long form. There's really not a whole lot of difference between the two forms. They're more or less similar, but there are a few less questions that have to be answered with regard to an individual who's already partially in the system. So step one, your child turns 18, you want to pick whichever one of those two applications is the appropriate one. You want to fill that in and you want to send it in. It does ask that you send it in with some documentation. In some cases, it makes parents feel like, whoa, I have all this documentation. So they are putting together 18 years worth of documentation. Probably really not necessary, and nobody at the division is actually going to be able to go through all of that. So I tell you to pick the strategic things. So you want to make sure that you are including the most recent IEP, the most recent tri-annual review. And the tri-annual review is that battery of testing that your school district does every 3 years to redetermine that the individual remains eligible for special education services. You want to have all of those evaluations put together as well. The earliest diagnosis documentation that you have. You want to put all of that together. You want to have any other important evaluations that may give or reflect some insight into where your child is functioning or the person in your life is functioning. That's what you want to put together, but it doesn't have to be every single piece of documentation that you have. So the criteria for to be eligible for services from DDD is the following. The individual has to have an intellectual or developmental disability. It has to manifest before the age of 22. Then that it has to be expected to be to continue indefinitely, and has to create what we call a substantial functional limitation in 3 of 7 areas of life activity. First of those areas is self-care. When we talk about self-care, we're talking about the person's ability to take care of themselves, the things we all do every day to get ready to go out into the world. So waking up and showering and brushing our teeth and washing our hair and getting dressed appropriately, all of those skills. The next one is learning. Then we have receptive and expressive language, mobility, self-direction. Self-direction really speaks to the individual's ability to plan and implement. And then we have activities of independent living. And those are a little bit different than the self-care. What we're looking at here is what are those skills an individual needs to live on their own? So doing laundry, cooking, going food shopping, washing dishes, cleaning a house, those kinds of activities. And the last one is economic self-sufficiency. So while I was reading those off, if in your mind, the person who you're thinking about would have a substantial functional limitation in 3 of those areas, it's likely that they would be eligible for division services. Often the question becomes, well, what is a substantial limitation? Well, when we think about this, what we want to be thinking about is the individual, and let's just say that we're all doing this and the individual is 18, so that we're doing it for a child who's 18 years old, we want to be comparing them not to who they were 3 or 4 years ago, but to an individual who's 18 and typically developing. How close is that bar? How close are those 2 individuals functioning? That's where you're going to see your gap. So if we really want to think about it, a typical 18-year-old could very likely be graduating from high school, starting off on their adventure of college, and a parent would be dropping them off at a dorm, tearfully leaving, crossing their fingers, hoping that they do know how to do things like laundry, clean up their room, and all of those things, but pretty much sure that the child's going to be okay, right? So that's where your child with a disability should also be functioning at age 18. So that's where you're going to get to see your substantial functional limitation. So look at the gap between that typically developing 18-year-old and the child with a disability. How does the division figure this out if all we're sending them is IEPs and evaluations and diagnoses? Because that doesn't really get to this, really. And we all know that our school records are really written with an eye towards the positive, to make the individual seem in some ways a little bit more capable or on the road to that capability. So how does the division get a really clear picture of this? Well, that's where the New Jersey Comprehensive Assessment Tool comes in, the NJCAT for short. So the NJCAT is a survey that the division has created that parents will take, and it asks questions that try to get at each of these areas so that the division can see if there is a substantial functional limitation and whether or not the individual then would be eligible for services. This survey is currently being done via phone. Pre-COVID, the division had started a system where people were actually coming out to your house, sitting across from you with their laptop open, asking you all of these questions and filling them in. But due to the coronavirus pandemic, that has now switched to being phone. So if you're somebody who's putting in an application right now, once your application goes in, the division will then reach out and they'll want to set up a time for you to do your NJCAT. I really do recommend that parents are very well prepared for this. This is not the kind of thing you kind of want to show up and wing. So, this is like taking that big test at school, not one of your quizzes. So the division has very nicely put the sample NJCAT up on their website. So I would really suggest that you mail in that application, print out this NJCAT, and sit there and go through the questions. And when you're going through each of the questions, I want you to think about the following things. First, I want you to do what we just talked about. Compare your child to a typically developing child of the same age. Then I want you to think about your child in a world that does not exist, a world where they are on their own. How would they function? How would they be able to do the things that they're able to do in your home? Because maybe you're setting up that environment. You're setting them up for success. So for instance, maybe you are making sure that when it's shower time, that there's soap in the shower and there's shampoo in the shower and there are clean towels that are waiting for them. All of those things setting up the environment. If you weren't doing those things, how successful would the child be in completing that activity? So you have to kind of like pull yourself out of the equation and look at what the child is able to do on their own when you're answering these questions. You have to be honest. You're giving information to a government agency. This information is then used to set a tier assignment, which sets up a budget through a Medicaid program. So can't just lie. People say to me, well, I'll just say that the kid can't do anything. Well, no, you can't do that at all. But on the other hand, I often see parents making mistakes of overstating what their child is able to do. And then the child ends up in a situation where the budget is not sufficient enough to allow the child to get the level of support and services they need, whether in a day program or down the road in a residential setting. So I'm going to go through some of the questions on here and kind of talk about how maybe to answer them. And this is where you'll start hearing me talk a little bit about Tracy. So in that self-care section, they're going to ask questions about, can the individual shower? Can they adjust the water temperature? Can they take care of their hair? Do they dry their body thoroughly? Can they toilet independently? Can they eat? So all those types of questions. And your choices for answers are either independent, supervision, or lots of assistance. Independent, if you're checking that box, has to mean that regardless of whether you are there or not, you have set the environment up or not, that child will unequivocally do that task. So I use this example. So Tracy's 27 and I have a soon to be 23-year-old. So when I drop my son off at college, I always say, like, there's never a day where I think of him and say, I hope he showered before he went to class. Hope he remembered to brush his teeth. Like, it's not on my radar. I don't even have to think about it. Now flip that around to Tracy going off to program. It's like, I hope she brushed her teeth. Do I have to get in a fight with her about doing that today? So there's the difference. Independent, not even on my radar. I don't even have to think about it. If Matthew runs out of toothpaste, he knows how to get it. He gets it. He does whatever. Not the same here. So independent, that's the box you check. If this child does this consistently all the time and needs absolutely nothing from you, and you are never, ever thinking about whether the child has completed it. For most of us, that's not a box that comes up that often. So the box that really comes up for us is, where do we decide between lots of assistance or supervision? So for me, supervision is just that. It's, I only have to tell you. So if I'm telling Tracy, get in the shower, or I'm saying to her, while you're in the shower, Trace, please make sure that you rinse your hair thoroughly. Don't forget to get the conditioner out. But I'm not helping her. And when she gets out of that shower, she has done a job that would be equivalent to a typically developing 27-year-old, then all she really needed was supervision. If, on the other hand, in order for her to actually complete that task in the way that a 27-year-old should, she would need me to help her out, like make sure that she's gotten the soap out of her hair, make sure that she soaped up all areas of her body, then that would be lots of assistance. Because at that point, I'm actually doing for her. I'm actually getting in there and doing it. Now, parents often say to me, well, that's really what my kid needs, but can I really answer the question that way if I actually don't bathe them? Because they don't want me to bathe them. That's not what the question asks. The question is not asking, do you actually bathe your child? It's asking, where does the child fit on here? So you need to let the division know what level of assistance they would need to be functioning at the right age level, not necessarily that you're doing that every night for your child. Because as a parent, as a practical matter, you want your child to feel independent. You want them to grow in self-esteem, and that's not going to happen if you're bathing them every night. But I can tell you, when Tracy and I have something really special to do, like a family wedding or a party, oh, you bet I'm washing her hair. So that lets me know that that's where she really functions, is she does need that level. So as long as it's an honest answer, that's the answer that you can put down. So that's the area of self-care. The area of self-direction. The division asks a whole lot of questions about who makes decisions, who decides what we're going to have for breakfast, who decides if we're going to go out with friends, if we're going to invite a friend over, who decides, I'm trying to think, there's like so many of them, if we're going to go to a museum or a park or any of those kinds of things. And your answers are either the individual with the disability decides, somebody else decides, or both people together decide. And this one does get a little bit tricky because a lot of times our child will say to us that they want to do something, but it's not really anything with any thought or planning. So that's not really self-directed, and that's not really deciding. So I'll give you an example. Tracy one time said, I think we're going to go to Italy this weekend. It's not really that hard, Mom. I see it on the internet. It only costs $1,999. Now, is that really a plan? I call that a wish and a dream. So if that's what your child does, and where they don't have any of the support to back up what they're actually going to do or get there, you really can't say that they've planned where you're going to go. So if what it really looks like in your household to get your child to do something is that you go to them and say, we're going out today because it's going to be a beautiful day, and we're either going to go to the park or the beach. Which one would you like to go to? And that child picks one of those two things. But if you had done nothing, that child would have done nothing. That's not the child deciding either. So for your child to be the one who makes those decisions, they need to be saying to you, hey, Mom, I want to go see this movie. It's playing tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Can you drive me and my friend Johnny? Okay, that's a plan. That's your child being part of it. And then your response back of, yes, I actually can do that. I can drive you. So there you go. That's the two of you coming together and making a plan. So look at those questions very critically, because a lot of people say, oh yeah, my kid picks what they want for breakfast. But then they really think about it. Well, my kid picks what they want for breakfast because I tell them you're going to have eggs or you're going to have, pancakes, and they pick one of the two. That's the both of you. That's not them on their own either. So kind of look at those questions critically. They're important because an individual who can self-direct needs less support services because they're able to take the next step, whether it be in a day program, a job program, or a residential setting. If they can't do that and they sort of need somebody to be with them to guide them, they need a higher budget so that they can have that person guiding them. The other section, the activities of independent living, the laundry, the washing dishes, the cleaning of the house. Again, we're going to look at that in the same way we looked at the self-care. Independent, they just do it all the time. Supervision, you just sort of have to direct them through it. And physical assistance is just you're physically helping them do this because they really can't do it on their own. Now, the division does throw in another option here, which is has not done, no opportunity to observe. And that gets a little bit tricky because parents say, well, I don't really know how well he would do the laundry because he only does the laundry with me, or I don't really expect him to do laundry. If you don't expect your 20-something, 18-year-old something kid to ever throw something in the laundry, I think you want to ask yourself, well, why is that? And I can tell you that with Tracy, the reason is because it takes just too much effort and too much work to do. So it's not that I've had no opportunity to observe her doing laundry. I know how much assistance she needs to do it. She needs lots of assistance to do it. So she might not do it on a regular basis, but that's because of my choosing not to kind of be in there doing it with her. So that one kind of could go between the has not done and lots of assistance piece of it. And you have to make judgment calls on, which ones that would be. The last part of this NJCAT I'm going to talk about is behaviors. So it's a very sensitive issue for most families. A lot of our children, my Tracy included, can have pretty intense behaviors. The division asks a lot of questions. They ask questions about self-injurious behaviors as well as aggressive behaviors. Please answer those questions honestly. I have a lot of clients who will say to me, I'm afraid to say that the child has behaviors. I'm afraid to say that they kick and hit people because I'm afraid they're going to take my child away. It's not going to happen. They're not taking your kid away. When you are ready to ask them to put your child in a residential setting, you're going to have to beg and plead and scream and yell for them to do it. So don't worry about that. But you got to put down the truthful answer, because if your child has behaviors, they need a higher budget. They're going to need people who are trained in behaviors in order for them to be in the right types of programs. And if you don't put down that your child has behaviors and they end up in a program where nobody has behaviors and the staff doesn't know how to appropriately manage behaviors, first time your child has a behavior, you're going to see the staff run. Your kid's going to not be able to go back. It's not going to be a good, safe situation for anybody. So just answer those questions honestly. I can assure you that nobody's coming in to take your child away just because they have behaviors. It's part and parcel of their disabilities. So once we get through this NJCAT, you will be told whether or not your child has been determined eligible for services, and you will also get a tier assignment. The tier assignments are letters. They go A to E, and then in some cases they have what we call an acuity factor, so they have a lowercase a. So you might have an uppercase A with a lowercase a. The acuity factor means that there are some either behavioral or medical need that the child has in addition to their self-care needs. These tiers are very important because the budgets really vary from $20,000 up to over $400,000, depending on the tier and the child's level of need. So it's critical that you have the right tier assignment for your child's needs. Christina, before I jump into the next part of this, were there any questions about the application process or the NJCAT?
Yes, so we've got quite a few. One is, where can the short form be found at Perform Care?
Okay, so if you Google DDD application, the link that comes up will actually have two parts to it, and one of them says short form, and then the other one is the long form. And I think we have the capability to email the group right after this, Christina. Okay, so we can email everybody both of those links so that you can just go to that to find it. So we'll send that out. Conference is today and tomorrow, so don't look for the email till like Monday. But we will send the email and we will give you both of those links to make it easier.
All right, the next one is, can you qualify for DDD if you are not on Medicaid, have a developmental, not intellectual disability, on Medicare, not Medicaid, receive disability benefits, not SSI? I don't know if you got it. Yeah, that was a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack there, but so the short answer is being eligible, yes, receiving services, no. So step one, you can apply for DDD services whether or not you already have your Medicaid eligibility in place, and please don't let anybody tell you otherwise. The division can determine you to be eligible for services. They will simply send you a letter that says you're eligible, but we're not providing anything to you until you get Medicaid, okay? Because Medicaid is the funding source for DDD services. There is no requirement that an individual be on SSI to get DDD services. SSI is just the easiest path to getting Medicaid for an individual with a disability. But if the individual for other reasons can't be eligible for SSI, that doesn't mean that they're not eligible for Medicaid in some form. This person mentioned Ssdi and Medicare. So I'm gonna, because I don't have the ability to ask you a question to come back to respond to me, if the reason the person is on Ssdi is because they have their own work history, and if that person is still currently working, they can get Medicaid through Workability, and then they can get DDD services that way. If the individual is on a Social Security benefit that's based on a parent's work history, that can get a little bit more tricky, but the division does have a waiver that would help with that. If the individual had ever been on SSI and then went on the parent's benefit, there's a federal regulation that bridges a gap there. So the answer is, whoever's asking that question, your child is not precluded from getting Medicaid based on what you told me, but I would need more information to tell you what route would be the route that would work for you.
Okay. Then I have, are there changes, parentheses, decreases in funding levels from DDD that are not related to NJCAT responses? We saw a marked decrease in DDD funding based on the most recent NJCAT, and our responses were very similar from the previous time. We double checked and the responses were marked correctly.
So the question there would be, was your tier, did the tier end up being the same? So if you answered the questions, 5 years ago, because every 5 years they will ask you to redo it. So if you answered the questions 5 years ago and you were a tier D, and then you answered them now and you're a tier C, there will definitely be a decrease. If you're the same tier, the dollar amounts equivalent to the tier have not changed. But you do need to take a look and see if your tier actually changed.
Said the tier, it did change. It went from a D to a C.
Okay, well then that's the problem. A D is a higher tier, you would have a larger budget, and the C you wouldn't. So what I would really counsel you is, if what you're telling me is your child did not significantly change, their functioning was the same when you got the D as it is to the C, there must have been some answers that you did recently that were different than the answers you did the time before, and that showed that the individual was functioning higher. I would recommend that you reach out to your support coordinator and see if they will give you, and they should, the actual completed questionnaires, and then you need to look at those side by side and see if maybe there was something that you answered differently that gave the division the impression that your child's functioning has improved. But your change in your budget has to do with the D to the C. So.
Okay. And then can the tier be reassessed if the behaviors get worse?
Absolutely. So if there's any change in the individual's functioning, you can request to do the NJCAT. The NJCAT the division's supposed to ask you to do it every 5 years, and I think they're sort of getting on track with that, or at least they were just before COVID. So you will have an opportunity every 5 years. They can also ask you to redo your NJCAT when there's a substantial change in services. So if your child is currently receiving day services and then you make it to the top of the list and you're going into residential services, it is very likely the division will ask you to do it again. Now, if you think that a tier assignment is incorrect, you can also ask for a reassessment, but you would have to show a reason why, like either something wasn't answered correctly, there was a change in some circumstance with the child, and you basically can ask your support coordinator to help you with this process. For the most part, they typically are able to help with that, with making that request. If the request is denied, and there is a substantial need, I would pursue it beyond that. It's an appealable process, and we help families with that all the time.
All right, and I'll do the last one before we move on. So my son recently started receiving Ssdi. Would he be covered under my wife's commercial insurance, Medicaid, and Medicare?
So the answer is probably yes. He can stay on. So if he's getting Ssdi and getting Medicare, you can still stay on private insurance and have Medicare. You just have to find out from your private insurance company who would be primary, and that's based on the private insurance company's, it's internal to their policy. Some of them say that Medicare would be primary and they would be secondary, and others say that the private insurance is primary, Medicare would be secondary, but that's not too typical. Medicaid, on the other hand, is always the payer of last resort. So for most individuals who have Medicaid, you stay on your private insurance until the child is 26 by federal law, and a lot of policies will allow you to stay on even beyond that. If the child has a documented disability, that's something you have to check with your Human Resources Department or with your private insurance carrier directly. But Medicaid would never preclude you from being on private insurance either.
All right, so I think we got one more. My son was just here to see. He's on medication to keep him from being violent. I'm concerned that in the future the medication would stop working, and as that's happened before, how long would it take to get a reassessment from DVD?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes they take a while to get, and sometimes they can go more quickly. So it's hard to really say. It all depends on kind of the urgency of the matter. So if the medication stopped working and the child is starting to exhibit behaviors, and I'm going to assume based on the question that you recently did an NJCAT, and when you did the NJCAT, you answered the behavioral questions the way he was presenting at that moment on his medications, and you said that he didn't have behaviors or that they were diminished. You want to write to the division and let them know his medication is no longer controlling his behaviors. We're starting, he's exhibiting, and write out a paragraph about it, send it in, ask them to let you redo the NJCAT. Again, if they do not respond with a yes to you, that is absolutely a reason to appeal, because that budget really does make a very big difference. So I can't really give you a time frame, unfortunately. It all kind of depends on the circumstance at that time within the division, and whether or not they're in agreement with you that an NJCAT should be redone.
All right, so we got one more.
Okay, one more, and then I'm going to switch.
All right, one more, and then we move on. All right, this one's a quick one. She just wants to double check. So at 18, if he's found Medicaid eligible, he can be on Medicaid and remain on private insurance.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Yes, you can absolutely be on private insurance and on Medicaid. Tracy is, most of my clients' kids are. It's very, very typical, and there's no problem with that at all. So, all right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Medicaid. I'm not going to do a very in-depth talk on Medicaid, and the reason for that is that it is being done tomorrow, and I'm probably guessing that a lot of you might have already signed up for that other workshop. So I'm just going to kind of give a very high level of the ways that you get Medicaid. So remember, DDD eligibility is one step, but it doesn't get you the services that you need when your child ages out of school. Medicaid funds all of DDD services. So we need to get the individual's Medicaid. For most individuals, applying for Medicaid would happen after the age of 18. So 18 is like a big year. I would say it's like, you got a kid with a disability, you got a lot of work to do when they turn 18. Because at age 18, the individual's financial eligibility for services is more likely to be in place. So up until 18, if a child is looking to get Medicaid or an SSI benefit, the parent's income and resources will count against the child. And unless the individual is living at the poverty line or just barely above the poverty line, they will not be determined to be eligible. However, when a child turns 18, the family income and resources all fall away, and they look at the child all on their own. And when that happens, for most of us, our children don't have an income stream. They don't have a lot of resources or any resources. So then they meet the means test, the financial test. Both SSI and Medicaid have a component that says your income must be below a certain number and your resources must be below a certain number. Just as a general rule, your child with a disability should not have resources in their name. If they have them and they're young, you want to get rid of them before any look-back period would apply. You just don't want them to have anything in their name because it'll actually make it harder for them to get services. The resource limitation that I really like my clients to kind of stick with is $2,000. There's only 1 or 2 programs that let you go above that. So for the most part, you're going to be on a program where if the child has more than $2,000 in resources, they will not be eligible. So make sure you take care of that. So if we want to get Medicaid and we apply for SSI, SSI gets us 2 things. It gets a monthly stream of money coming into the child, as well as Medicaid, which will hook you up to your DDD services. If for some reason the individual can't be eligible for SSI, there's another program, it's called Age Blind and Disabled Medicaid. That program gets you Medicaid only. It does not get you an income, a monthly income stream like SSI does. To be eligible for Age Blind Disabled, the individual has to have income that's below approximately $1,100 a month and resources below $2,000. But that Medicaid program also will connect you to DDD and let you get DDD services. There's also Workability, which I touched on a little bit before. So Workability is a Medicaid program for individuals who are between the ages of 16 and 64 who are working. It does allow you to have resources of up to $20,000. I still don't really recommend or suggest that anybody save that kind of money in their child's name, only because it is problematic for other benefits, means-tested government benefits. But it is also a Medicaid program that will be a funding stream for DDD. So once you have your DDD eligibility in place, you've got to get one of those Medicaid programs in place, and then you have your funding stream ready to help you get your DDD services, because you need those 2 pieces together. And then if you've done this when your child's 18, you can kind of sit back until that September where your child is turning 21. And then it's time to make sure that the division is aware. My child's going to age out of school this coming June, and we need to start getting services in place. Division's not going to start planning with you in September. They're probably going to start planning with you sometime in April or May, where you're allowed to get your support coordinator and work with that support coordinator to set up your plan, to start looking at the different programs that are out there. And for most of us, when a child is leaving their educational entitlement, what we're really looking at is that they're going into a day program. And parents always say, well, how do I know what program to go to? Where do I find these programs? So as a parent, I found that the best way to do this is, so my daughter was in a self-contained class and it had multi-level students in it. So she had friends that were a year older than her and 2 years older than her that aged out before her. Well, I went and talked to those parents. Where are you sending your kid? Because our kids are similar. They're in the same class. They've got some similar needs. They know my kid. I know their kid. I know, who's picky, who's more choosy about the programs. You want to talk to those parents too. You want to make sure that your value system kind of aligns with them, because if they're going out and they're looking at stuff and they find a program that's working really well for their kid and their kid's 2 years ahead of your kid and they say, yeah, it's working and it's still working, that's like the best recommendation that you can get. Other than that, talk to the support coordinator. They can tell you there's other programs out there. You have a right to go look at them. Obviously, now you can virtually tour them. But you can go and meet with the people under normal circumstances, see what services are being offered, what is the program like. And under fee-for-service, we parents have a lot of choices. So your child doesn't have to go to one place every day, all day, doing the same thing. We can put pieces together. So if Tracy goes non-COVID, because right now she goes nowhere, but non-COVID, she was in a program where she did some days that were recreation, some days were a work program, and in part it was a work program that she was paid for a few hours, and then the other few hours it was a volunteer program. And she did this with the support of a job coach with a cohort of like 3 other individuals, and that worked for her. Other individuals can work more, work all the time. Some people just need job coaching in, getting into a job environment. So really you get to kind of dovetail this into what it is that your child's needs are and where you see your child being able to function. So DDD obviously becomes your major funding stream, and it will be filling that time period where the child used to be going to school with some type of day habilitation services. Beyond that, what does the division provide? The big, and I know that there was a housing workshop that was just before, and I'm going to assume maybe a lot of you were on the housing workshop. My understanding is that was more about the types of housing. But how do you get the funds to have those support services in that housing situation? That's DDD again. Now, in order to get DDD housing services, there is a waiting list. DDD provides housing services through a Medicaid waiver. It's called the Community Care Program. Community Care Program is a Medicaid waiver that is administered by DDD. So you can't just go out there and find the application and send it in and apply and get on that waiver. The application comes from the division to you, and in order to get that, you have to be on a waiting list. And I know some of you out there are going to put in the chat box, I was told there is no waiting list, that it does not exist. I can tell you that it exists. I can tell you that there's a unit within the division called the Community Care Program Waiting List Unit, which would give me the sense that it exists. And by the way, my daughter just got off the list, so I'm pretty sure she was on the list for 12 years. So factually and legally, it does exist. So let's talk about how you get on that list, because it's critical. So the default way to get on that list is the youngest parent is 55. When the youngest parent is 55 and the child is DDD eligible, so if the youngest parent turns 55 and the kid's only 16 and not DDD eligible yet, you can't get on the waiting list. The child has to be eligible for DDD services. So child is eligible for DDD service, youngest parent turns 55, notify the division. Just tell them, I'm the youngest parent, I just turned 55, please add Johnny to the waiting list. They actually have a form. Again, it's a Googleable form, and you can just send it in with a copy of your driver's license to give proof of age of the parents, and your child should be put on that list. When you get on that list, it's approximately a 10 to 12 year wait to get to the top of the list. There are other ways to get on the list. If your child has extreme behaviors, if your child has extreme medical need, if one or both of the parents have health or medical issues, if one parent has passed and there's only a single parent in that household, if there's more than one child with a disability. So basically what we're looking for here is a reason for you to be on the list earlier, because we're trying to say to the division, this family's not going to be able to make it. For the youngest parent to turn 55, wait 12 years before they can get a housing solution. They need to be on this list sooner. And you have to write a letter, make your case to the division. Again, it's appealable if they say that they won't put the individual on the list. So keep that in mind as well. But getting on this list as early as possible is very helpful because, again, it does take 12 years to get to the top. Whenever we talk about this waiting list, we always get the question, well, what if something happens and my child's not at the top of the list? Well, that's an emergency placement. And that happens as well. What an emergency placement does is it lets you make your case to the division for all of the following reasons. I can't wait to get to the top of the list. You have to take me from wherever I am, even if I'm not even on that list, and you've got to make me the next person, and I've got to get onto that waiver. And that, again, is based on things like usually extreme behaviors, extreme medical need, crisis within a family, death of a parent, any number of things that create a situation where the individual cannot be maintained within the household. The case gets made to the division. They make a determination. If they agree that the situation meets the criteria of an emergency, you'll be given the ability to apply for the community care program and get right onto that waiver. That waiver opens up to you a larger budget. And that budget is now meant not just to provide your day services, but provide those residential services. Thing to keep in mind is with placement on the CCP, it is not required that the individual does become immediately placed. So if you're on the waiting list and you get to the top of the list, it opens that budget up to you, and you can bring services into your own home if that's what you would like to do instead of placing the child. But it puts you in a position to have the availability of those funds to provide those wraparound services for that individual. Christine, are there any questions on that portion?
Not directly pertaining to the care waiver, but I've got one that I think packed on the tail end of the Social Security is, why does Social Security still ask questions regarding parents' income and household expenses when applying for SSI over the age of 18 to move toward adult services?
It's a great question. So yes, I will explain that. So typically what happens is they're not asking it at the initial point of application if the child's over 18, but they've determined your child meets the disability criteria and that your child meets the income and resource limitation. And then they say to you, so how much is your mortgage? How much is your property taxes? What do you spend on food? Utility bill? I think it's the sewer and the water bill. And I think it's your home insurance. There's like 6 or 7 things that they say, what are these bills? And then they say, how many people live in your house? They're not doing that for an income reason. What they're doing that for is to determine whether or not the individual is receiving what we call in-kind support, or I shouldn't say what we call, what Social Security calls in-kind support. So let's say the highest amount that an individual can get as an SSI benefit is around $700 something, right? If it cost to live in your household, when they add up all of those bills, let's say it comes out to $6,000, and there's 3 people living in your household. They will divide that $6,000 by the 3, and they will say this individual, it costs $2,000 a month for them to live within that household. And then what they say is, even if we gave that individual the highest amount of money that we could give under an SSI benefit, that individual is receiving support from their family, and that is going to be deemed in-kind support. And what they do is they do a 1/3 reduction. They reduce the SSI benefit by 1/3 because the person's getting in-kind support. So it's kind of counterintuitive. If your bills are really low, your child will get a higher benefit because they're receiving no in-kind support. But if your household expenses for food and shelter are higher, your child actually receives a lower monthly amount of money because they're receiving in-kind support. But that's the reason that they're asking. It's not for the eligibility piece, it's for the determination of in-kind support and the amount of the monthly cash benefit.
All right. Ooh, I had 2 come in at the same time. Let's see what I have here. Do you have to spend your monthly SSI, and can it be spent on charging rent to your child?
The answer is you do need to spend your monthly SSI, because to be on SSI, your child has to have less than $2,000 in resources. And if you don't spend it and it stays in that bank account and it accumulates to be over $2,000, then your child will lose their benefits because they will not be eligible. So the fact that it's SSI money that you saved doesn't change that calculus of the fact that it is still considered to be a resource. So you must spend it. Can the child pay you rent? Yes, your child can absolutely, without a doubt, pay you rent. Things that parents need to be aware of on that. So rent to you is income to you. I have had some clients who've charged their child rent, talked to their accountant at the end of the year, and been quite unhappy about the fact that they did that because it was not a positive tax experience for them. So I always say to clients, you absolutely can charge your child rent. There's no reason why you can't, but make sure that you look at the tax implications of that. If there may be, there may not be any, but for some people there would be. So you want to make sure you check that out first so that you don't do something that you inadvertently are unhappy about after the fact. There are other ways to spend that money other than having your child pay rent. So Tracy does not pay me rent, but she does pay $200 towards the food bill, and then she will use that money for things like haircuts, clothing, getting her nails done, trying to think, there's like nothing we can do right now, but she used to spend it to go out and do fun things, going to a movie, going to a show, that kind of stuff. She would use those funds. We would use it for that. So it's there for their use. Social Security says it's supposed to be used to provide food, clothing, and shelter to the individual first. But if those things are already provided, then it can be used for anything for the sole benefit of that individual. So when I say that Tracy would use it to go to the movies, if I went with Tracy, she couldn't treat me. She could buy her ticket, her popcorn, but she couldn't buy it for me. So she can't be spending that money on others. She has to spend it on herself.
All right, so now we've got some CCP questions. What if your child is already on the CCP waiting list and a possible opening presents itself as a residential facility you wish to place your child in?
Great question. So if that were to happen, unfortunately, if you're not at the top of the list, you're not necessarily going to be able to get that placement, because without the CCP budget, you won't be able to do that. Are there any criteria in your life that would allow you to create an emergency to leapfrog from wherever you are on that list up to the top of the list? Now, those individuals who are still on the list, I didn't get mine this year because Tracy's off the list at this point, should have gotten a letter. I think they went out in like June-ish. Or maybe even later because of COVID, that told you where your number is. They typically say if you're up around 100 and 150 that you're what they call like reachable, and likely, you'll be reachable. Well, under COVID, things may be a little bit slower, but you would think it would be, within the year. So maybe there's a way to finesse that, but you have to be able to get off the waiting list onto the CCP to get that residential placement. And that can be very tricky and very disappointing if that spot is available right now. But you have to be able to trigger that emergency.
All right. The next one is, how can I find out if my daughter's on the CCP waiting list? I think we applied years ago, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so for that person, if you did not get a letter within the last 2 months telling you that your child is on the list, was placed on the list on XYZ day, that their number such and such on that list, and that we're now serving people who were placed on the waiting list on whatever day, then your child is not. By regulation, the Division of Developmental Disabilities has to annually notify anybody who is on that waiting list. What may have happened years ago, and depending on when it was, I hear a lot of this. There was a point in time where people were being told that they were on the list, but they were actually on a general waiting list. And the general waiting list isn't the waiting list that moves and that people are taken off of. It's just sort of like a big file cabinet over there at DDD. But I do hear this quite often. But unfortunately, if you did not get that letter and have not been getting that letter, you are not on the waiting list.
All right. And how does the special needs trust factor into this, especially if it's a high amount?
Okay, so a special needs trust is a way for resources to be put aside for an individual with a disability without affecting benefits. And I think we have a workshop. Christina, is it coming up on trust, or did that happen?
No, I think it's tomorrow, and I think it is at, hold on.
So
11:30.
Okay, so there is one that's going to go a deep dive into trust, but just as an overall understanding of them, the special needs trust allows you to put money aside for the individual with a disability that would be in excluded resources for purpose of benefits. And if the money that's going in there belongs to somebody other than the individual with a disability, like for instance, when I die, part of my estate would go into a trust for Tracy. That's my money going in there. It's a third-party trust. If Tracy had money in her own right that needed to go into a trust because it was affecting her eligibility, that would be a first-party trust. And the two trusts have slightly different rules, and they are important to know, but I'll leave that to the workshop that's for tomorrow. But anybody who's a child with a disability should have a third-party special needs trust that is set up as part of their estate plan to ensure that there are funds that are set aside for that child that will not jeopardize benefits, but will allow the child to have more than what the government provides.
All right, next one. I was told that we can get on the CCP waiting list as soon as my son's intake was completed, but they won't put us on the list until we get a support coordinator. We're over 55. Was that intake person making a mistake? Thought we could get ahead by almost a year.
So if your child is 18, has been determined eligible for DDD services, and both parents are over 55, you can get onto the list. There is no requirement of having a support coordinator. It's eligibility and youngest parent turning 55. So I think, so now I'm sorry, I'm confused. Did the intake worker tell you you had to wait for the support coordinator, or the intake worker said you didn't need to? What did the question?
So it said, I was told that we can get on the CCP waiting list as soon as my son's intake was completed, but they won't put us on the list until we get a support coordinator. We're over 55. Was that intake person making a mistake? I thought we could get ahead by almost a year.
So the intake person told you you can. She is correct. I don't know who the they is right now, but I would write to the division, and if they do not respond, this is the kind of stuff we help families with all of the time. But you can get on the list at this point, as long as you're eligible, over 18, and the youngest parent's 55.
Okay. Where is there a comprehensive list of residential facilities for New Jersey, and what is the best way to research them?
Wow, that's a great question. So there was at one time out there on the web a list of all of the providers that are DDD approved. I don't know exactly where it is, but it is out there somewhere. But it's just a listing of names of agencies. So again, really, you've got to Google them, call them. You want to get a comfort level with the different providers, see which ones you feel are good, and everybody has a very different sense or feeling about what they would want in a service provider. So just having a list, I don't know if that's overly helpful. Your support coordinator should also be helping you with this. There's really not an easy way. Once you're on the CCP and it's time for your child to, time for you to explore placement for your child, the support coordinator has a listing that actually shows who has openings. Because the other problem is, as parents, we can go and Google anything that we would like to, but we may find the perfect agency, but they have absolutely no openings. So that's kind of useless. The support coordinator through the division has the ability to see openings in your county, in your community, and let you know which agencies they are. And then that's a better way to do it, because now they're fine tuning it for you and you're not wasting a lot of time. But if you're looking for your own list to do it independently, I do know it's out there. I just don't know where it is. I'm sorry.
And then one person says, how do you get on the list?
On the community care placement program list?
Would think so.
So that's the one I was just mentioning before. Youngest parent turns 55, child's eligible for DDD services. You have to notify the division. You can notify them through your support coordinator. You can notify the division directly. And you would automatically be placed on. Or if there's any of those circumstances I talked about, extreme behaviors, extreme medical need, illness for either one or both of the parents, more than one child with a disability, any of those extenuating circumstances can also get you on the list earlier than the youngest parent turning 55.
All right. And then daughter started collecting SSI in January, and we were told to contact them when we decided to start charging rent. So once we start, that could, the fact that we didn't charge her, be considered in-kind support?
No. Probably what's happened so far is they're giving you the lower benefit because you're not, and if you start to charge her rent and you show proof of that to Social Security Administration, the amount she receives may increase. So.
All right, and then I've got one more. Can the money paid by SSI be put into the special needs trust so that the amount of money does not exceed $2,000?
SSI money is meant to be used for the individual's basic needs. It's not really supposed to be saved and should not be going into a special needs trust. It should be being used for the child. So that would be something that Social Security would frown upon. However, if you were doing that, or if you have a Social Security benefit that's based on a parent, that is a little bit different. Those funds you are allowed to save. You have to be aware, but those funds belong to the child, so they go into a first-party special needs trust, not a third-party special needs trust. And that type of a trust does have a payback provision to the government at the end of the child's lifetime. Any other questions about programming or DDD or?
Just one more. How do you get a support coordinator?
Okay, so if your child is turning 21 and aging out of school, a few months before the end of the school, DDD will contact you, usually about 3 months before that point, and ask you to choose a support coordinator. There is a list of support coordination agencies on DDD's website. I would say in advance of that, you want to print that out, you want to highlight the ones that are operating within your county, and you want to start calling them. You want to talk to them. You want to see how responsive they are. You want to find somebody who you can work with and work well with, because that's the person who you're really going to be going to all the time to help you get the support your child needs. Once you find one that you think is good and that you're happy with, then you fill out a support coordination form, you submit that into the division, and they will link you. The nice thing about this is you can change at any time. You can change as many times as you like. So if you pick somebody and they're not what you expected them to be, or you thought they were going to be better, or you just don't gel with them, you go right back to that list, pick somebody else, and you can go ahead and you can switch as many times as you'd like. But that's how you pick your support coordinator.
And what about DDD?
21. You know, it has to be close to 21.
One more about DDD is we did an application for DDD before he was 18, but we're denied. He's now 19 on SSI in school with the one-to-one aid, and they have obtained guardianship. We're getting ready to reapply. I think I have overestimated his ability. Not sure. The question is, any particular time frame should we apply now or wait closer to 21?
I would absolutely not wait till 21, because if you were denied once, and I'm going to guess based on the rest of the question that you did not take up an appeal with DDD when they denied you, that's something you need to appeal. So if you go ahead and you reapply now and they deny you again, I would absolutely take the appeal up, because if you don't, the individual will not be able to get benefits. And when they age out of school at 21, you won't have a day funding for a day program or any services or supports that the child will need. The reason I would say do it now and not wait is because if you do end up in that appeal situation, it could take you 2 years before the appeal is actually determined. You want to do it as soon as possible because you want those services to be able to be in place when the child ages out of school. So I would do this immediately.
All right, and I think that just answered the last question on here. So I think you're good to go forward.
Okay, all right, great. All right, so we were getting ourselves to a point where we're on that housing list, and we were talking about how we get on it, and then we were talking about, well, what happens when you do get to the top of that list? So when you get to the top of that list, you're going to get an application to apply for the community care program. That doesn't necessarily mean that bang, slam dunk, you're in and you have the CCP. There are 2 issues that we really do have to be aware of. So issue number 1 is to be on the community care program, the individual has to meet a level of need. Now, that level of need is different than the level of need that's to be put eligible for DDD. So if you have, your Venn diagram, you have your big circle, here's everybody eligible for DDD, and you put that other circle this way, there's going to be this crescent-shaped group of people who are eligible for DDD services but will not be clinically eligible for the CCP. Where do we see that happening? Well, individuals who are a tier A, a tier B, and yes, even some of our tier Cs, the division determines doesn't actually meet the clinical level of need to get onto the CCP, and that is a problem. So the reason for that is to get on the CCP, the individual has to be that, but for this waiver, the individual would need to be receiving an institutional level of care. So for somebody who's an A, B, and some of our Cs, that self-care number that we talked about at the beginning, those self-care questions, they're actually people who are relatively independent with their self-care. They might be considered not to meet that level. So if that were to happen and you wait all this time, you get to the top of the list, and then they say to you, oh, sorry, we still can't give you the CCP because you don't meet level of care, they actually can't just make that determination. They need to give you that application. You need to fill out the level of care paperwork. There's a form that asks specific questions about level of care. They have to deny you and give you a chance to appeal. So just know that, just so that some people they hear that from the division. Well, the division says we're not eligible, so I guess we're not eligible. Oh, well, and they walk away. You don't want to do that, because that's going to prohibit you from getting residential services. And it's someday parents will not be here and the child is going to need residential services. So the time to take up that fight is right then and there. Take up the fight and go forward with that. If the child, however, like Tracy, she's a tier D, there's no question she meets the level of care, then it becomes, does she meet the financial requirements for the CCP? Because again, it's a Medicaid waiver, so all Medicaid waivers have an income and resource limitation. So Tracy is on SSI currently, so the division doesn't make us fill out the entire application, because an individual eligible for SSI has a more restrictive income and resource limitation than the CCP, so they know she's eligible, so she was able to just go on to that. However, if your child is receiving a Social Security benefit on a parent, if your child is receiving an SSDI benefit on their own work history, if your child has income from a job, they may not actually have the ability to fast track, which is what Tracy did by having SSI. They may actually have to fill out a complete application for the community care program. That's fine. It's easy enough. It's a typical Medicaid program. They ask questions about income. They want to see bank statements. And you have to provide all of that information. And what they're looking for is income, including unearned income, that is below approximately $2,100 a month, and resources that are below $2,000. Once you do that, and then you've met the eligibility criteria for CCP, you have a meeting with your support coordinator, and they flip your budget. So you come off of the budget you had before that was really just for day services, and they move you on to your larger budget. It opens up for you. And as I said before, back a number of years ago, you got to the top of the list, and the question was what group home you want your kid to go to, because that's what you were waiting for. You were waiting to go to that group home. And if you said, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for my kid to move out yet, they would take you to the bottom of the list and they would go give somebody else that slot. With the CCP, it's different. They're putting you on the waiver anyway, and you can, again, bring services into your home, or you can look for an out-of-home placement, whichever one it is that is best for your family at that point in time. I do recommend to families, it in some ways sounds great that, okay, I don't have to place my kid. My child can continue to stay with me, and maybe I can just use that budget, and I can have people come in the morning. I can have people take her out on weekends or in the evenings. But I do want to remind families that our goal here is to sort of step ourselves out of our child's life, so that, and not in a way that like you're not hanging out with your kid, but that you're not the primary caregiver. And the reason for that is we should not outlive our children. They are likely to outlive us. And if we're not here at some point and we haven't set this up where they're getting their support services elsewhere and they're in what I call a sustainable setting, what happens when the parents pass is that everything in the child's life ends on one felt swoop. And now you've got other people trying to set them up in a placement. So although it might give us some comfort and that we have them stay home and bring in those services, you might want to do that to kind of bridge a gap, but at some point you really need to try to be setting them up in some other type of a living arrangement. Now, it doesn't have to be a group home, right? So it doesn't have to be that you go find an agency and they have an opening in this group home on this block in this county, and that's where the kid's going to go. You could look for an apartment. You can look for an apartment with somebody else who's also got DDD funding, and then you can use the budgets to bring those support services into that apartment. You can do a self-directed model. You can do what we call an agency model. So sometimes you can partner with an agency, and you might, purchase a condo or a garden apartment, and bring those support services in through an agency, so that you're kind of contracting with the agency to bring the services in using the child's budget. There are a number of different ways that housing can happen. And we're really sitting here on the cusp of even more ways, because parents are looking for new and innovative ways to do this. And every parent has a different idea, and everybody's trying to push that envelope. So, no idea is off the table. It's just a matter of making them mesh and work together, and making sure that you can sustain both the bricks and mortar of the house, of the living arrangement, and the support services. And we've really talked mostly about support services, but the other piece of it, so let's say that you do want to get your child an apartment. In order to do that, how do you pay this rent, right? Because our children may have only an SSI benefit, and it may not really be that substantial. Well, the division has vouchers, and the voucher system allows an individual to have part of their rent paid by the state of New Jersey. So when you have that voucher, you have to find an apartment that is within fair market value rent, and then the individual will pay 30% of their income, not 30% of the rent, but 30% of their income, and the state will pay the balance of that, so that the rent is paid through the voucher system. Now, there's DDD vouchers, there are Section 8 vouchers, there are SRAP vouchers. Those you have to get your names on waiting lists for. Those are separate, they're not through DDD directly, but DDD does have vouchers which are helping to bridge a gap for individuals who cannot get on to those other vouchers because of their long waiting lists. So it's this two-part system to get the housing piece of it. Christina, are there questions? I'm just noticing that I think we're getting a little short on time.
Yeah, there's, if you place your child in an apartment type set up with others, can the parents contribute to the costs?
So that's a very complicated question. You cannot contribute to the rent or the shelter. There's other components of it, like, if you're buying furniture, if it's cable, if it's phone bill, if it's those kind of things. The problem is if you're contributing towards the rent, so you can't say to the division, fair market value rent for this area is $1,000. I want an apartment that's $2,000. I'm going to pay the $1,000. You can still just pay. My child will pay their 30% of their income, and then you just, the division, you pay the other part of what would be fair market value rent. That you can't do. The rent has to be below fair market value, or you don't get to use the voucher at all. And most of us need the voucher in order to provide the housing piece of it. Also, for Medicaid purposes, funds that are available to the individual for food, clothing, and shelter can be deemed income. So this becomes a little bit of a thorny benefits issue when you're actually putting out funds for food, clothing, and shelter to the individual child. So there are things that parents can help to subsidize. The rent is not one of them to use to make a voucher accessible, and we do have to be a little bit careful because of benefits issues. But you can help with other supports, other pieces that the child needs that they would not be able to afford, as long as it's not the food, clothing, and shelter piece of it.
Okay, and then I have, if we charge rent for my son, he will get higher SSI, correct? And then do we need to show evidence or receipt of rent?
Yes, if you're charging your child rent and you let the Social Security Administration know that the SSI amount should go up, they typically do ask that there's a lease that is signed. And don't forget, Social Security Administration can do a review of the individual's SSI money and how it's spent. So if you're telling them that you're charging him rent, you need to be charging him rent.
Okay. Do I have to register my daughter for DDD before she is out of school at the age of 21? She's already in Perform Care.
You still have to fill out the application at age 18. You can do the short form application, but simply having Perform Care eligibility does not give you DDD eligibility. You still have to fill out an application in between.
Can you use SSI for her portion of property tax for the household?
So in effect, having her pay rent to the parents to pay that the parents would put towards the property taxes. She's a renter in the home. She's not required to pay property taxes. So I think what you're trying, I think the question is, can the person pay rent and then the parents use it for property taxes? If the child is paying you rent, the money then becomes the parents. You can use it for whatever it is that you would like to.
Okay. And I think that sums up, I think we got to all of the questions.
Okay, all right, excellent. So, all right, if there are no more questions, okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining in and for coming to our second.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go
How do
ahead.
you determine what fair market values?
There's a, if you Google fair market value rents, it will bring you to a website. You can actually like put in your zip code and it will tell you what it is within your area or the area that you're looking at. There's actually a chart and it's determined by the government.
Right. Oh. I think we already registered with DDD. Is after 18 a different division?
So the person might be saying that when the child was younger, they had applied to DDD. Years ago, DDD provided services for individuals with disabilities from birth until death. So when Tracy was 8 years old, I had applied for her to DDD. Back in 2013, the rules all changed. And for anybody who was under the age of 16 in 2013, their DDD eligibility was terminated. And now you do have to reapply at age 18. So if the question is, I had applied a long time ago, I'm now with Perform Care, do I have to reapply for DDD? The answer is yes, you do.
All right, I think that is Medicaid insurance good coverage by itself?
That's a very personal choice. I know some people who think it's fine. I know some people who don't think it's fine. My personal feeling is that if I have the ability to keep Tracy on private insurance, I think that's what I would do for her medical needs, and I use her Medicaid for her support service needs. But it kind of depends on if the doctors that you're using are Medicaid doctors or not. There's nothing wrong with Medicaid or Medicaid doctors, just sometimes they're harder to find. So that's really more of a personal choice.
Okay. That's it.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. Hope to see you guys on some more of these Zooms, and I hope everybody's going to tune in tonight for our keynote speaker. It should really be a treat. I actually can't wait to sit back and relax and watch her because she's a very inspirational speaker. So thank you again for joining in, and we'll see you on these see you on some more of these conference breakout sessions. Everybody stay safe and well during these crazy times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this encore presentation from the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. With 24 other presentations to view, there is plenty of additional information to help you become empowered. As a reminder, the information contained in this video is not a substitute for individual legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Copyright 2020 Hinkle, Pryor and Fisher, PC, Attorneys at Law. All rights reserved.